Yeah, the uncertainty growing in Mali in the wake of weekend attacks, what with the death toll in the car bombing near the capital that killed the defense minister rising to 22. And in the north, an alliance of Tuareg rebels and jihadist insurgents claiming more gains after taking the town of Kidal, where there were videos posted of Russian mercenaries who were given free passage out to nearby Libya. In the capital, where the head of the junta has not been seen in public since the weekend attacks, the presidency posting pictures of the Russian ambassador alongside Assimi Goïta. Well, for more on this story, we can cross now to a researcher, Folahanmi Aina, political scientist with SOAS University of London. Thank you for being with us here on France 24.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, your reaction to those still shots that were published on the Twitter account of Mali's junta leader.
Yes, so again, it simply reflects Mali's strategy under Goïta, which has mostly been to reinforce or reemphasize the use of military approaches to solving the security crisis in Mali at the expense of a prioritization of other non-military efforts, that have serious consequences for peace and security. For instance, the need to address the underlying root causes of the protracted conflict in the region. And so what we've seen again is a determined effort, to intensify military approaches, which has only had the unintended consequence, unfortunately, of contributing to the protractedness of the conflict. It doesn't necessarily solve the problem. In fact, on the other hand, the data shows that Mali continues to struggle in its effort, to regain peace and security in the country.
Yeah, the images are making the rounds, not just in Mali, but throughout Africa, of those Russian mercenaries from Africa Corps, formerly the Wagner Group, leaving the northern city of Kidal and awarded safe passage by the insurgency to nearby Libya. Is it a turning point for Russia's presence in those so-called coup belt states of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso?
No, on the other hand, Russia perhaps would be simply re-strategizing and reconsidering its efforts in the region without necessarily, coming in the way of the decision by the juntas to determine how they would like to move forward with regards to, guaranteeing the safety and security of their citizens. But ultimately, when push comes to shove, Russia will be more inclined to protect its own interests in the region, not necessarily at the expense of its troops or the Africa Corps, but to ensure, that its priorities are aligned in such a way, that guarantees a win-win for it. Even more importantly, the recent developments also shows that Mali, as well as the other AES states, cannot continue to depend on, Russia to guarantee the security of their countries. Rather, they need to look inwards and determine, what's best for them with regards to solving the problems that has persisted for so long, which in many ways doesn't necessarily constitute an overdependence on military solutions, but rather a combination, as I mentioned earlier, of both military and non-military efforts.
Yeah, you mentioned tackling the root causes. To understand that, there's an alliance here at hand. This isn't one monolithic group, the insurgency. And stay with us, Folahanmi Aina, because we're going to take a look with Ellen Gainsford at one of the key players in that insurgency, the head of the Jenim jihadist insurgency, Tuareg-born Iyad Ghali.
Head of the Al-Qaeda-linked group Jenim, he's one of the most wanted men in Mali. The French military, Malian authorities, and Russian mercenaries have all sought in vain to capture Iyad Ghali. Born in 1958 in a Tuareg village in the northeast of Mali, he's a member of the Ifugas tribe. He first took up arms for the Islamic Legion. a pan-Islamist force created by former Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi. Ghali returned to Mali at the end of the 1980s, where he founded the separatist group, the Azawad National Liberation Movement. He became close to the musicians of the group Tinariwen and was said to enjoy smoking and drinking whiskey. After launching a Tuareg rebellion in June 1990, he signed a peace accord with the Malian army the following year, before moving to the capital Bamako to become an advisor to former President Alpha Oumar Konaré. Over the next 2 decades, he adopted a more radical vision of Islam under the influence of Pakistani preachers. And in 2012, he founded the Sunni Islamist militant group Ansar Dine, controlling much of northern Mali and the cities Timbuktu, Gao and Kidal. His fighters enforced Sharia law, cutting off hands, stoning women and flogging children. For these acts, Iyad Ghali is the subject of an arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court for war crimes and crimes against humanity. The French military intervention, Operation Serval, halted the jihadists' advance. Iyad Ghali disappeared in the desert, but his group continued to strike and to grow stronger. In 2017, Ansar Dine merged with several organizations under the banner Jenim, a multi-ethnic group with links to Al-Qaeda. The Tuareg veteran was chosen to lead the coalition. Since then, Iyad Ghali and his men have only strengthened their influence, to the point of threatening the very existence of the Malian state.
Yeah, and we're in the company of Folahanmi Aina, a political scientist at SOAS. It was interesting to see that report because the many incarnations of Iyad Ghali sort of mirror the way in Mali, those who oppose the system as it is, well, they adapt to the times.
Yes, absolutely. Also, something very important to note with regards to Iyad's rhetoric is the fact that Jenin primarily is an Al-Qaeda affiliate. And so in many ways, they are doing the bidding of Al-Qaeda and trying to, in many ways, entrench Al-Qaeda's footprint in the troubled Sahel region, particularly with regards to gaining grounds in Mali, and of course in other countries such as Burkina Faso and Niger. But primarily, Jenin's goal is to topple the government of Mali and to take over, to gain more territory and to take over Mali's sovereignty. And that's why it continues to inflict severe attacks, on both troops and as well as civilian populations, without any necessarily need to reduce its attacks in the country. As we've also seen in recent times, it's imposed a fuel blockade to try to cut off supplies into Bamako and other parts of the country. And also, in many ways, it's very much interested in the gold, that Mali possesses, to be able to use that as an opportunity to expand its reach and to diversify its sources of income. So yes, in many ways, Jenin's goal, which appears to be the most formidable jihadi group in the Sahel as of today, is very much keen to entrench itself further and has no plans to leave the country or the broader region, but rather it's seeking more territory and more expansion opportunities.
One final question for you. We have a military leader on the back foot in Mali. What does he do next? Does he turn? He's severed his ties with former colonial power France. He's got the Russians are also on the back foot. Does he just rely on support from neighbors such as Burkina Faso and Niger? Or does he rekindle ties with the rest of the West African bloc, ECOWAS?
Well, right now, because the Mali is a member of the AES, the Alliance of Sahelian States, it's only expected that he would begin to, court these other member states to potentially support him in his quest to try to regain control of Mali. But unfortunately, the stark realities are that these other countries are equally struggling in themselves. They don't have the necessary equipment that's required to wage the kind of war we're seeing in the Sahel, which is mostly irregular warfare unlike conventional warfare. Also, they lack the number of troops, because currently the military in Mali is overstretched, as we've also seen, which is the case across the AES states, whether it's in Burkina Faso or in Niger. So the optics aren't looking very good for Goïta at the moment, and so his best option, rather, might be to consider leveraging whatever relationship he's had left with ECOWAS on the one hand, and also potentially rekindling his relationship with the West, on the other hand. But to completely rely on Russia, as we've seen in the past, hasn't necessarily helped him to regain control of the country. Unfortunately, the data has shown, that Mali has lost more territory and has also continued to struggle in its quest, to gain peace and security in its country.
Folahanmi Aina, so many thanks for joining us here on France 24.
Thank you for having me.